I wasn't going to film today's project because I didn't think I'd succeed. I've got this lump of aluminium and I want to try to make a Turner's cube. I've got a little device here to put the square piece in because I've only got a 3-jaw chuck and that will hold it. And lo and behold, I actually succeeded in making something that looked a little bit like a Turner's cube. So I thought, well, I may as well film the rest of the process. After all, there are heaps of videos of proper professional people making Turner's cubes. Anyway, I want this Turner's cube to spin within this piece of aluminium. And I've made a couple of little brass screws to hold it. And so the next step will be to drill those holes and tap them. And the screws are M6, so I'm just going to centre drill and then drill. And then tap the hole. I've got one of these spiral taps, so I'm just going to let the mill do the cutting for me. Really easy in aluminium. There it goes. Reverse and start it up again, and it winds its way out. Magic. And a little test fit of my little brass doodahs, and it winds in beautifully. Okay, I'll make a couple of little holes for those to spin on, and again I'm just using a centre drill here and just drilling some very small holes so that the points go into the edges. And while drilling I'm telling myself, don't mess it up, don't mess it up, don't mess it up, after all the effort I went to make this thing. The cube's by no means perfect, but it's good enough for this project. Anyway, let's just see if it fits. By putting just the right amount of tension on those screws, it should hold it in place and allow it to spin like that. Ha ha, yes. Well, it has to sit on something, so again I'm going to use some of this aluminium and a little bit of brass scrap that I've got, and I'll sit that on top of the brass. So the little plinth I'll make about that deep. The bit of brass scrap's not flat, so I need to just mill a nice flat surface on this. And look at that beautiful smooth surface that's been produced. Lovely. Time to cut the plinth. And I found that if I just use a bit of ordinary bath soap on the blade, it cuts through the aluminium a lot easier. Aluminium's a bit sticky when it gets cut. This is just a cheap Ryobi bandsaw, but with a little bit of patience and some fast action motion, it cuts through the aluminium quite happily. The next step is to surface all of those cut surfaces. So we've got nice, smooth and square plinth to put the rest of the pieces on. And I'm just using the power feed on the lathe to feed this into the mill. Lovely and smooth. Well, that's one face done. 5 more to go. That's all the faces surfaced, but I've got some burrs left over, and I'm just going to go over to the sander and sand those burrs off with just a little bit of a bevel. I found an 80 grit sanding pad does a beaut job of this. I don't have a DRO, so everything that I do has got to be measured and marked manually. So I mark the centre of the plinth because I want to drill a hole into it and tap an M6 thread in, because I want the bolt to go through the turner's cube thingy and the brass disc and into the plinth. And in my usual brilliant style, I forgot to press record and didn't show this one being tapped. But here it is coming back out again. I love these spiral taps. They work magically. A beautifully cut, perfect thread. I'm going to cut a 5mm step in the plinth just to give it a little bit more interest. And again, I've got to do this sort of manually. Now, I can use the measurements on the lathe to get this right, but I'm marking it out just to make sure I don't make any mistakes. But I can just touch off the cutter, move it away to the side, and then use the lathe to move it 5mm. And Bob's your uncle. It'll all be ready to start cutting. The reason you're seeing the lathe turning in the background is because I'm using the power feed on the lathe to move the material under the mill. Alrighty then, that step's done. The plinth is finished except for just a bit of chamfering around those top edges. Well, actually not finished. I decided I was going to polish it. I originally thought I'd just leave the milling marks on it, but I'm a bit too pedantic for that. So I'm starting with just a Scotch-Brite wheel and then finishing it with the buffing wheel. There we go, that's better. Bit of a rub over with the rag and yep, nice and shiny. The brass is a piece of scrap that already had a hole drilled in the centre of it, but that's going to be covered up. I'm now just cutting the channel that will fit the cube. Yep, that'll do, and as I said, that hole will get covered up. All that remains is to drill a 6mm hole through it so that the bolt can go through. I need one more hole in the ring. This hole's the hole that the bolt will go through to hold it onto the plinth. So it's just 6mm straight through. Lastly, I'm just going to mill a 1mm thick flat surface over the top of that hole, just so that it sits nice and flat on the brass. This isn't what you call the most rigid, so I'm just taking my time to make sure everything stays in place as I mill that surface. And a test fit of the brass proves that it fits quite happily. Now comes the exciting bit. All the parts have been made and now it's time for final assembly. No, you idiot, don't put the cube in yet. You've got to mount it first. Right, that's better. Oops, didn't get that slot perfect. It's not fitting. Turn it round. Ooh, phew, lucky. So, onward to screw in the base. Finally, all lined up. Hang on, it's not spinning. Oh, poop. It's hitting on that bolt. The bolt head's too tall. So I had to fix that. And let's give it another try. Okay, this time. Aha, yes. No worries. Look at that. I'm actually quite pleased and not a little bit surprised that this project has actually worked out. I'm just a self-taught hobbyist and all this stuff is really stretching my skill level and I guess improving it as well. Anyway, this has been a fun project and is going to end up being a present to a friend. As much as I'd like to keep it, there's only so much trivia you can put in the house. Thanks for watching and feel free to comment and tell me all the other mistakes that I've made that I haven't actually pointed out to you. So, until next time.